Stephen Pollack is the backstory real quick because I want to get into the meat of this, but we don't have a lot of time. So we were talking about Bitcoin, and anytime I talk about Bitcoin, I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. And I admit that freely and openly. And apparently, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to let him tell the story. Stephen Pollack joins us on the show. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a funny story. So I'm at home working. So I work for an organization. We're a charitable 501c3 nonprofit, the Bitcoin Policy Institute. Mm-hmm. I'm at home working in the afternoon.
You're the SVP over there, aren't you?
I am. Yeah. I run operations there. And my wife, who listens to your show every day, probably listening right now.
What's your wife's first name? Jacqueline. Thank you, Jacqueline. God bless you. Appreciate you.
Love you, Jacqueline.
I don't love you, Jacqueline, but I like you a lot. Anyway, go ahead.
That's not what you said when we were off air. So she calls me. She's like, Murphy's talking about Bitcoin. People are calling in like, they don't.
It's chaos.
You need to call in.
It's
and
chaos.
See what's going right.
That's what she told me.
So I'm like, I call in for the first time. Talk to the producer. I'm like, hey, if you ever need anything, let me know. Had no context. He throws me on live with you. We actually had a great discussion 5 minutes before we had to go to commercial. It was a great conversation. And Matt generously reached out and asked me to join live.
And you brought this young gentleman in with you, Matt O'Dell. Am I saying that correctly? I wrote it, yes, and sir. I cannot read my own writing.
You nailed it, O'Dell.
O'Dell. What's up, Matt?
Howdy. It's good to be here.
Good to have you guys. How did you come to know, understand, and dive into the world of Bitcoin, Matt?
So I've been active in the Bitcoin space for about 11 years now. Mm-hmm. At first, mostly focused on education, and now I do a wide variety of different things in the Bitcoin space. To me, I was a young man. I was a quote-unquote disenfranchised youth. I thought there wasn't that much hope left in the world. And to me, Bitcoin is hope. To me, the whole open source movement is hope.
Okay. So let's, and either of you can just jump in and take it because I'm just gonna fire hose you with questions. So I'm an alien from another planet, right? And I've just come down, and I've just been given information about money, right? I'm told that money, and let's see if we agree with this. Money has an assigned value.
Yes.
Right. So, it is a method by which we barter goods and services.
Right.
Fair? So if I have that understanding of what money is, and that's it, explain to me what Bitcoin is.
Shall I take this?
Yeah, go for it.
I like to describe Bitcoin as simply better money. It's money that's not controlled by any individual, company, government. You can spend it without permission. You can save it without permission. And the beauty of it is because it's so hard to change because no one controls it, it has this fixed supply. You can never make more Bitcoin. So in general, the thesis is as more people adopt it, the purchasing power should increase. The price should increase. There's free market for money. So if you can buy a certain amount of chickens today with Bitcoin, in 10 years you should be able to buy way more chickens because that money can't get
solely based on supply and demand.
It's just straight supply and demand.
So I think where sometimes I get confused is whether or not Bitcoin, and you just answered it. So Bitcoin is a currency. It's not an investment.
I think good money should increase in value over time if you save it. I think this idea that people need to be like a stock picker, they need to be able to pick different investments to save their money or hire someone to do it, is an absolutely crazy concept that is actually relatively new. It's like the last 50 years, 60 years.
But Bitcoin's not a tangible asset.
It is digitally native, but you can own it yourself, and no one can take it away from you if you own it.
Can you possess it?
You can possess the private key that unlocks the Bitcoin that allows you to spend it.
All right, so far am I asking the right questions as the alien from another planet?
I think these are great questions. One of the cool things is even though it's digitally native, you can put that private key, for instance, it looks like a set of words, like 24 words, right? And you can put that on steel. You can bury that in your backyard. No one can take it from you unless they dig it up.
See, so the currency investment question is based on this because I understand how to grow wealth. If money is assigned value, I can grow wealth through labor.
Right.
So, but you're telling me because Bitcoin is finite, I can't grow Bitcoin through labor.
No, you can. You can earn You can earn dollars and convert it to Bitcoin, or you can earn Bitcoin directly.
And this is where I get
Obviously.
aggressive. Why are dollars even in the question if Bitcoin's my new currency? I don't want to use dollars anymore.
I don't. Well, I use very little. I think it's a question of where we are in the adoption cycle, right? We're phasing out this government money that is the standard right now, which is what most people, except for goods and services.
So we're in transition.
And we're in the transition period.
Okay.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, most transactions will settle in Bitcoin. You'll go to the grocery store, you'll pay in Bitcoin. You'll save your wealth in Bitcoin. You'll pay your employees in Bitcoin. Your long-term savings will be Bitcoin.
So if Bitcoin is finite, how does it become not more like a gold standard? In that
Because it's perfectly divisible. So, right now one Bitcoin is on the free market. It's valued at $67,000. No one does transactions based on a $67,000 increments, right? But you can send small little amounts of Bitcoin. I can send you $5 worth of Bitcoin, $2 worth of Bitcoin. They're smaller.
Well, once again, we're working on the dollar system for what you call a monetary system.
Right,
Why aren't we working on the Bitcoin system?
Some of us are, but I think for your audience, it's easier to conceptualize it in dollars.
Fair.
There's something called a unit of account. It's this idea of how do you measure wealth? How do you measure cost of things? Right now, the global dominant unit of account is dollars.
Sure.
I think ultimately it will become Bitcoin. And one way to visualize this, one perspective to visualize this, is if you live in Venezuela, the government says that you're using bolivars, right? But that's not people's unit of account. People's unit of account is US dollars. They flee to the better money, right? But what happens as the dollar gets corrupted and gets worse and worse, which is the trend we're seeing. I'm not pulling this out of thin air. Dollars are increasingly losing value. Inflation is running hot. Where do you escape to? And Bitcoin is that stronger money that's not controlled by a government that you can escape to.
Don't the same institutions that we claim that we're trying to get out of the process have to adopt the process in order for that to happen?
I think they're incentivized.
Do you understand my question?
Yes, to a degree. I mean, there's certain things that we have no choice but to spend in dollars, things like taxes, things like government services.
But the entire idea is to decentralize the process, right? But aren't the centralized institutions, don't they necessarily have to take up Bitcoin, and by necessity they're going to re-centralize Bitcoin as a result if it becomes the dominant monetary policy?
No. The reason, look at international trade right now. Look at a country like Russia.
You don't think they're going to want to take a controlling interest in this when they do it?
Well, I think they're going to.
Well, then they're not going to do
controlling interest, right?
If they can't control the policy, they're not going to take it up as the monetary unit.
I think we'll see how that unfolds, but I think that there's some game theory at play. Let's look at as with what we focus on, we have a lot of conversations with, and we put out a lot of resources about human rights activists and people like this all over the world, right? Mm-hmm. And that are able to opt out of dictatorial regimes and to conduct their work, whether it's nonprofit work or activist work, in spite of the controlling government interest in Russia or wherever have you. Mm-hmm. So it's a way to opt out. It's a way to have peer-to-peer transactions, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to think that Bitcoin's going to replace the dollar in order for it to have value.
I'm just trying to understand what Bitcoin is. Is it a tangible asset? Is it a commodity? Is it a currency? I'm just trying to and it seems like it's just it seems like it's none of those things, but it's kind of all of those things.
It's just freedom money. It's money.
Saying that it's freedom money means nothing.
It's money that you
explain what that means.
Because it's money you can spend and save without permission. Here's the thing. The institutions will adopt Bitcoin.
But it's finite, so I can't spend and save without restrictions.
Why?
Because it's finite. There's a finite amount of it, right?
There's a finite amount of Bitcoin, yes.
Mm-hmm. So I can't spend and save without restrictions because there's a finite amount. By definition, if there's a finite amount, I can't spend as much as I want.
I mean, if you have no money, then you have no money to spend. But if you have money, no one can stop you from spending it.
But I can create money through labor because money is an assigned value.
Because someone is paying you money.
Right. What they're paying me is a representation of my labor.
Right, but let's pretend we're 10 years in the future and we're under a Bitcoin standard. Right?
Okay, I'm with you.
Your advertisers are just going to pay you in Bitcoin, and then you can go to the store or whatever. You can pay your rent, pay your mortgage in Bitcoin. Boom, done.
How did all of these Bitcoins? How do they grow as more people use them? Do they subdivide?
Yes,
because they're growing in value.
You can essentially
there's not really a finite amount.
There is. If you cut a pizza into 9 slices versus 7 slices, there's still the same amount of pizza.
Yeah, but if the value of the smaller slices still grows, right?
Yeah, it's still finite. The pizza slices are just worth more.
But you're counting those smaller slices as individual slices.
Yeah, but it's still the same amount of pizza.
But you're assigning a higher value based on supply and demand.
Yeah, no one's assigning anything.
The slice, right. So you're subdividing something that doesn't actually exist into what we call smaller amount. Well, you can't hold digital. You can't hold it.
I mean, you can hold access to it.
Show me a Bitcoin.
It's digitally native. You can't show someone a Bitcoin.
I'm just asking you to show me. You're right.
I mean, yeah.
I'm not trying to be. I'm just.
No, I understand. But I mean, if you listen to music on Spotify, does the music not exist?
No, of course the music exists. The artist exists. The source material exists. That's a replication of the source material that was created through work by the artist, and the supply chain and the demand of that artist product was such that they replicated it on Spotify and whatnot at a cost.
Okay, so let's actually reset the conversation for a second, because you mentioned work, and I think that is a key aspect here. Bitcoin relies on this concept called proof of work. When new Bitcoin are distributed along this supply schedule that's hard-coded, right, to get to the 21 million Bitcoin, the total amount of Bitcoin, that requires proof of work. That requires energy expenditure, verifiable energy expenditure for miners to receive it. So all Bitcoin at its core, when it's first distributed, requires work to receive it. And then every participant in the system is obviously working for the Bitcoin that they earn from their employer or who's ever their customer.
Sure. So what is the mining? I mean, we've heard the term. What is that?
Yeah, it's fairly simple. I mean, it's the Bitcoin mining machines, right? You're like, what the heck is that? Somebody digging something out of the ground? Some people think that still. It's a computer. It's a computer that's running.
Right. We're not talking about digging in the dirt. We're talking about mining.
When you say mining,
right.
People think, right. And I've had people think that it's a data center, right? That's running transactions, that's verifying those transactions, and they're distributed all over the world. And so when you do a transaction, you do a Bitcoin transaction, that it's not just one massive data center that's verifying that. It's distributed all over the world. And the same thing with nodes.
The cool part about mining is, first of all, you don't need permission to mine. Anyone can plug in these computers anywhere around the world to mine. The second piece that's really cool is it's a competition, a global competition for cheap, reliable, robust energy. And this is a Nashville-based show. Nashville is not only quickly becoming the Bitcoin capital of the world, but also it's becoming a massive Bitcoin mining center. Like, we have tons of Bitcoin mining operations throughout the greater Tennessee area. I have a venture fund that's focused on Bitcoin companies called 1031. We have multiple mining investments that are in Tennessee. And this is because Tennessee has some of the best energy in the world. We have some of the cheapest, most efficient energy in the world. Policymakers understand the importance of energy abundance for a flourishing society. And it's been absolutely beautiful to watch Nashville and the greater Tennessee ecosystem grow in that regard.
Well, is it fair to say that the value of Bitcoin is driven almost exclusively by demand?
It's a free market, as everything should be.
Right.
No one controls it.
Well, but if I have all of the gold in the world,
yeah,
and everybody wants it, it has great value.
Right.
If I have all of the gold in the world and nobody wants it, it has no value.
Correct.
Right. But the gold is still there.
Right.
Is the Bitcoin still there if it had no value?
Yes.
Where is it?
I mean, it's in the cloud.
If nobody wants it, if everybody sells it for money, no, I'm being serious. If everybody sells every Bitcoin that's ever been mined for money,
right?
Everybody somehow just magically, collectively says, we don't want this anymore, we're selling it. Where's the Bitcoin?
So, I mean, you've heard the term blockchain, right? I assume, but it's like one of those bullshit
Don't assume that I've heard anything.
Okay, so the blockchain is this ledger. You can think of it like a distributed Excel spreadsheet, right? And the miners and the nodes are constantly updating this ledger and transmitting it among computers. That is the record of every Bitcoin transaction that's ever happened. So if everyone sells the Bitcoin... I'm not asking you for a record of the transactions. I'm asking you, where is the Bitcoin? It's in the record of transactions. So the Bitcoin is the digital record. Correct. So it doesn't really exist. But it's a record of ownership, but that cannot be changed. I'm not trying to be obstinate. It doesn't really exist. I mean, I think it does exist, but it's digitally native.
It exists because people recorded that at one point.
And that it can't be
people
changed.
Transacted.
The key is that it can't be changed.
Once again, go back to my gold analogy.
Right.
Nobody wants the gold, but the gold is still there. So the gold has no value, but it still exists. But what I'm understanding, and maybe I just don't have the brain to understand it, that if nobody wants Bitcoin, the actual Bitcoin ceases to exist.
But
the record of transaction exists. Everybody sold it for money.
But here's the thing: who'd they sell it to? It's a free market. There's no such thing as every seller has a buyer. Like there's someone else owns the Bitcoin. You've sold it to someone. There's no central clearing agency.
So you're telling me if no one wants to buy your Bitcoin, then the Bitcoin ceases to have value.
I'm telling you that if everyone wanted to sell their Bitcoin tomorrow, I would buy all the Bitcoin at $1, and there's thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people that would buy it at a higher price before it hit.
Well, what if they don't? Then you take a bath?
That's what a free market is, though, right?
So I got to get to a break. Can you guys stay a little bit longer?
I said as long as you want.
Because this is a fascinating conversation to me. I hope it's fascinating to others. We've got Matt O'Dell and Stephen Pollack in studio with us. They're Bitcoin masters, and I'm throwing questions at them. Because I just want to know. I want to learn, and I want to figure it out. If you have questions, 615-737-9986. It's 1254 on Super Talk. 615-737-9986. Our guests are Matt O'Dell and Stephen Pollack. They're talking to us about the Bitcoin conference that is coming to town and just Bitcoin more broadly and generally. And I'm glad to have these two gentlemen in studio with us. Okay, your mics are on. Is your light on over there? Yes, it's on over there. Bell left me. I don't know where he went. He goes to the bathroom.
I'm
on. Very good. So are you guys excited? I mean, you mentioned, Matt, I want to step away from the in-depth conversation about Bitcoin for a moment, talk about the conference.
Yep.
So I would imagine, based on off-air conversations, there's a level of excitement, but also a lot of work for you guys locally that we've got this Bitcoin conference coming to town.
There is. So the Bitcoin conference team, Bitcoin Inc., Bitcoin Magazine, those guys, they're actually based in Nashville. They have been for a while. They put on in my opinion, the most impressive conference that I've ever been to. Moved from Miami. They were there a long time. They brought it to Nashville this year, which was fantastic. And anyone who's thinking about going, I encourage you to go. It's going to be an incredible week. But yeah, it's going to bring a lot of work for Matt and myself. That's for sure.
It's a busy week and it's just getting started. But just to put a little bit of perspective there, I worked with their team pretty extensively throughout the last 3 years. I stopped working with them directly last year, but 2021 we had 13,000 people in Miami. During COVID, we had no mask mandate, no vax mandate.
Giddy up.
People said it was going to be a super spreader event. It wasn't. 2022, we had 25,000 people in Miami. 2023, we had around the same. But if you look at the speakers, in 2021, we were excited that El Salvador's president was speaking virtually, saying El Salvador was moving to a Bitcoin standard. Last year, we were excited that RFK, who's obviously not a likely candidate to win the presidency, was talking about Bitcoin and was there. And then this year we have President Trump coming, likely next president of the United States, obviously a previous president of the United States coming, talking about Bitcoin, talking about how he likes Bitcoin. This thing moves slowly, but it moves fast. Mm-hmm. And it's pretty crazy watching the whole thing play out.
Look, and I told you guys during the break, and I'll just open it up for conversation for the listening audience. I am naturally a suspicious and inquisitive guy, but I'm not anti-Bitcoin. I don't want to come off that way, but I'm going to, ask these pointing questions, try to get to the bottom of it, because I'm intrigued by it, but I'm also mightily confused by it. No,
I think you're asking questions that any reasonable person should ask.
Yeah.
I think that's dead on, and I appreciate your willingness to just go toe to toe. And people who aren't familiar with Bitcoin and never heard of it or never bought it or whatever and are naturally skeptical. I mean, that's most people, and that's why that's how the free market works. Like, you have to be able to. So, I would say, based on what we were talking about, a common refrain you'll hear, and I'm not, I didn't come up with this. Look at the internet in the 90s, right? In the mid 90s. Mm-hmm. And if I were sitting here, and you can go back and you can find talk shows, Good Morning America, talking about email and what is an email and how does that work and how does it get to my
little symbol? I don't understand.
And how does that get to my mailbox? Right. And how do I open up that letter? What are you talking about? I click on it with what? It's a very similar conversation. That doesn't mean those people were ignorant. That doesn't mean they had no idea what they were talking about. They're asking very reasonable questions about a technology that over the last,
they
20,
look silly
30
now,
years,
but
it looks silly now.
that's
And I
hindsight,
think, and I would say some of the answers, I have, and I don't know, I won't speak for O'Dell, but that I have and that we have even as a Bitcoin community 20, 30 years from now, you can be like, man, we really messed that up. That wasn't at all what this turned into. But I think those questions are important to establish a baseline understanding of Bitcoin and digital currencies.
How did Bitcoin, and a lot of people on the Members Nutrition Super Text line, I'm seeing some of these questions come in, and I'm seeing several ask them how it got started. How did all of this get started?
Well, I think you got to go back to the backdrop, and this is what we started to get into whenever I called in the show 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And O'Dell, get ready. I'm going to kick it over to you. But the backdrop is 2008 financial crisis, and we saw some things happen in the market and in our society that we had never seen before, that shook the bedrock of our financial system.
Too big to fail.
And out of that comes an anonymous developer, a coder, and a super coder, as we say. And out of this comes this new technology begins to emerge. The code is released. It's not held private. It wasn't used to build a company. There is, for those who are still wondering, there is no CEO of Bitcoin. There's no board of directors for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is not a company. Nobody works for Bitcoin. It is a currency. It is a means of exchange. It's not a company. And so this decentralization of the code, where anyone could mine it, where anyone could acquire it, and it was a community effort started by an anonymous coder who goes by Satoshi Nakamoto. So if you ever hear that name, that's a pseudonym for the man or woman that published the white paper. They had a lot of work. A lot of people came before them. A lot of people were working on something similar to Bitcoin or digital cash way before Satoshi came along. And Matt, I'm going to let you fill in the technical glitches there in my answer.
Is that before you fill it? I mean, is that one of, when you talk to people like me that are trying to learn, that are inquisitive, that want to pretend that they're smart, is a big obstacle that you have to overcome the anonymity of the beginnings? I would think. I mean, that makes people naturally suspicious about all of this.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think at the core, right? The core is Bitcoin relies on something called open source software. The fundamentals of open source software, and the beauty of open source software is anyone can read the code, anyone can modify the code, anyone can distribute the code. So if you're a technical person, you can look at Bitcoin's code and you can see the guarantees that Bitcoin makes. The problem is most of us are not technical. And for those people, it really is just a time thing. It's a multiple touch points. It's a time thing. If you're skeptical of Bitcoin today, that is completely normal. That's natural. In 3 years, you might be less skeptical. In 5 years, even less so. In 10 years, you're all in on the Bitcoin standard. And so what I say to most people is like, look, I'm not here to convince you today. I just want to be your first touch point if I am your first touch point. And as time goes on, your understanding will come and you'll have more confidence in it. So
without a centralized tip of the spear, right? Without a company that is Bitcoin, without an organizational structure, are you concerned about scams? Are you concerned about, there have been money laundering schemes that we've seen over the years involving Bitcoin. Sure, there've been, there's a reason they call it money laundering. I'm not suggesting this is happening with money because it's called money laundering, but are you concerned that there's no oversight in the process to protect individuals who are invested in Bitcoin in getting scammed?
No, I'm not. I'm actually relieved. Most of the large scams you see, whether it's Madoff or Sam Bankman-Fried, that's because it's centralized. So decentralization of Bitcoin is a feature, not a bug of the program, of the currency. So anytime someone's managing something and there's this centralization, either whether with a company or with a country, that's when there's the most risk. That's when there's the most risks. But a decentralized currency where I can actually hold it, for the first time in history, this is something I shared with an elected official a few months ago. And this is a real story. When the United States fled Afghanistan, a lot of people were left high and dry. You can agree with that or disagree with that or whatever, but there were a lot of people, Afghanis, that were left holding the bag overnight. The banking system was changed. ISIS and terrorist organizations took back over their country. So you can imagine being a middle-class family, middle-class woman, and having your entire life savings essentially evaporate overnight, right? Mm-hmm. Essentially, I don't think that's too much of a stretch. However, if you were to save your money or to transfer your money into Bitcoin and you were holding Bitcoin as an Afghan native, for the first time in history, you can memorize 12 words. You can walk through airport security. No one can stop you, and you can take your entire net worth anywhere in the world. For the first time in history, you can do that. They can't scan it when you walk through security. They can't come. The only way they can do it is to torture you and get your 12 words, and there's even ways to avoid that.
If I do make that investment, I don't mean to interrupt you, but if I do make that investment, I am, and I'm not suggesting that there are not similarities to monetary policy. I'm gambling that other people will maintain the demand of Bitcoin, right? There is a gamble that the demand will continue to go up so that the value holds steady.
But it's not as much a gamble as participating in a global economy. I mean, it's a global free market is what it is. And this is one of the things is like, it's very easy for people to come here and be like, buy this thing, it'll go up in short term. That to me is gambling. Like, it's just going to make you instantly rich. What I often advocate is a long-term saving strategy. Just people should save money. People should save money for their children, for their grandchildren, for their own freedom. And the thing about Bitcoin is Bitcoin requires radical personal responsibility. And I don't think, because there's no customer service line. There's no one you can call and be like, oh, my Bitcoin was stolen or I lost access to my Bitcoin. And that scares people in today's age. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for us to go back to. I think if you look at a lot of the fundamental issues with our society.
So people get hacked and you're like, tough luck?
They lose their money. If your Bitcoin is stolen.
But
it's your fault.
Is that that's a selling point?
Yeah, because at the same time, no one can take it away from you. Like when you use a bank, right?
No. When people get hacked, it gets taken away from them.
Yeah, no, but what I'm saying is, to me, that is a selling point because what it does mean is there's no other entity that has control over your money.
So the bad guys become the hackers instead of the centralized banks.
But you can use a centralized bank.
But most people don't have a command of computing.
That's fair.
To the point that they can mine. Most people don't have a command of computing to the point that they can prevent these super hackers from coming. So
it's easy. It's really not that difficult. So it's really not that difficult.
Then why does that? I can pull up hacking stories. Why does it happen then?
The hacking, most of the hacking that happens with centralized exchanges. It's like you keep your Bitcoin with Robinhood. Robinhood has to protect it.
Okay.
If Robinhood gets hacked, they lose the Bitcoin.
So it's the third parties.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can call Robinhood's customer support and maybe they'll bail you out if something happens, right? So you have that trade-off there. But you could also hold Bitcoin yourself, and companies in the space have made it much easier. So there's just like little USB device, you plug in your computer, and your Bitcoin never touches the internet. Your private key, that private key that controls your Bitcoin, you just never have it touch the internet. And what does that mean? It's a very simple security model. It means that no one can take your money through the internet. They have to physically come into your house, put a gun to your head and take the Bitcoin physically. They can't hack you through the internet. That we call that cold storage.
The Bitcoin physically that doesn't actually exist.
Correct.
What were you laughing about?
I was laughing because I just saw your mind get blown. Whatever.
No, it's not, because it is dependent on. It's dependent on independent knowledge. I don't think that you have a base of knowledge worldwide that gives comfort to people that they can protect themselves. I wouldn't want to store all of my money in my home. And I got plenty of guns. Because I wouldn't want the possibility, the risk of that being stolen. That doesn't mean that it's all in a bank somewhere. So you're asking people to protect themselves when I don't know that they have the knowledge and the ability to do that.
First of all, two things. We can go deep down Bitcoin capabilities, but Bitcoin does have this feature where you can separate that secret, that key. You can put it in multiple places. That's never existed before in human history. So instead of someone just coming into your home, like someone can't come into my home and take my family's Bitcoin because that key is separated around the world and you have to go to other places. You have to go to multiple places in order to compromise it.
Multi-sig.
Do a few, I'm getting asked this question and I've got a rapid fire because do a few people own the vast majority of Bitcoin?
There's no way to tell for sure, but it's quite distributed at this point, and it gets distributed even more so as the price increases because people have needs and they need to spend their money in order to buy things. But to go back, you mentioned guns, right? And I think guns are a really perfect example here. Firearms are a perfect example here because they require radical personal responsibility.
Sure.
And when people realize the need for them, they go and take that responsibility. And money is almost, is probably more important than, I guess it's hand in hand with defending yourself, right? Money is one side of every single transaction. And if people want the well-being of their family long-term and they want to be able to support themselves, then they will realize the need and they will take that personal responsibility in order to obtain and protect their money.
Fair. So, and I'm a radical when it comes to personal responsibility, so I get that. So, Bitcoin is internet dependent. Is that fair?
I mean, to a degree.
Okay. I think it's, just for the purposes of our discussion.
Sure.
Bitcoin is internet
there's some
dependent.
things to discuss, but yeah.
Dark web? Are we going dark? No. I'm just, I just asked you a question and your face changed. I don't know what happened.
I've never heard of the dark web.
So, a lot of governments control their internet.
Right.
So, is that not a concern?
Well, that's why I said the reason it's a nuanced question is because if there was no internet globally, then Bitcoin would have a serious problem. But as long as there's pockets of internet, you're good. So like in Afghanistan,
China doesn't have a free and open internet.
But my point is,
they're 2 billion people.
Yeah, and also like a lot of their people understand how to get around their restrictions because they see the need, so they figure out how to do it.
I think it's a loose definition of a lot, but go ahead.
But the key, they got like a billion people, so millions of people. You can transmit Bitcoin offline, right? You can move Bitcoin offline without internet, and we see people do that. He used the Afghanistan example.
Well, who's writing on the ledger? When does the ledger? When do they got to have a ledger?
You only have to do when you're updating the ledger. Is the only time.
So you got to have the internet at some point.
Right, at some point.
So you always have to have the internet.
But that's why I said it's pockets of internet, right? So like if for whatever reason we go down and I think we're going down dark territory in America in terms of internet restrictions.
I agree.
We're seeing ID required.
That's why I'm asking the question, because I think the government's coming after it.
Okay, but if that's the case, like you can take your Bitcoin offline. You keep it offline at rest. You can take that with you. You can go somewhere where you do have internet, and at that point, you can broadcast a new transaction globally.
Which is the point of the ledger, because then the ledger says, "Oh yeah, you did have that last time you're online. You go somewhere else."
Because everybody's got a copy of the ledger, and so people can't fudge the ledger.
You don't have to have nonstop internet connection like your cell phone. Is what we're trying to say.
I get that. I get that. I can be out in the Colorado mountains or whatever, and I can transact, and then eventually the transaction will be ledgered down.
Right.
My concern is more structural control of internet activity through government, and like Bitcoin. I mean, Bitcoin doesn't exist in China in the fashion that it exists here. I mean, I don't know.
It's more black market there.
Right. And so.
But it is the same Bitcoin, to be clear.
So in order for Bitcoin to succeed, it necessarily means that we have a population that demands that we continue to have internet freedom. Is that a fair statement?
For Bitcoin to flourish, yes.
Okay,
in
sure.
America.
Okay, sure. I'll agree with that.
Otherwise, it goes into the shadows.
Right. It like other countries that have a more dominant government control over their internet.
Right.
So the question I keep, I love all of this. It's deep and it's down and it's dirty, but a lot of people are asking about Bitcoin versus other versions of cryptocurrency. What are your thoughts on that?
Sure. So there, a lot of other cryptocurrencies are scams, honestly. But as someone I was talking to this morning said, if you look at the majority of music on Spotify, most of it's trash. Does that mean all of it's trash? No. There's just a lot of not great songs out there. There are a ton of fantastic songs, right? But a lot of cryptocurrencies are outright scams, and you have to be very careful.
So if you have people who are listening right now that are interested in taking next steps, how do they figure out what's trash versus what's not trash?
Just focus. I think just focus on Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the signal. Everything else is mostly gambling. You might be able to make money on it short term. But the key here is, first of all, anyone can launch a cryptocurrency if they want. Humans are naturally greedy, so plenty of people have done it to try and make money themselves.
But Bitcoin separates itself.
Because no one controls it.
But you would suggest it's not gambling in terms of supply and demand because you believe in the natural demand of Bitcoin? Well, that it's the nature of Bitcoin that it's going to grow in demand?
I think long-term savings and saving in a hard asset, a hard money that has qualities of money that make it a superior money to anything else that exists is a prudent conservative decision. That is not gambling. Now, there are day traders on Bitcoin, right? There's people that go 100x long on Bitcoin. That's obviously gambling.
Yeah, because
it's a free market. You can do whatever the hell you want. But
so for the people that want to dig deeper, because I'm out of time, and listen, one, thank you guys for your time, because I know it's a crazy week, and you gave us an hour, and I appreciate that. Number two, I want to have you back, because I don't know if anybody else is fascinated with this conversation. I'm fascinated with this conversation.
Anytime.
And how can people find out more? Are there resources online available that you trust?
Yeah, Matt has a whole, you have a whole list of this. Give a few resources or where to find them.
If you go to odell.xyz, that's my personal site, ODELL.xyz. I have a full list of resources, including beginner resources.
And then for what we focus on at BPI, the btcpolicy.org, if you want to get into some deep dive things on national security, Bitcoin, environmentalism, and man, just the future of money and some of the things we're covering here. If you're a rabbit hole guy or gal and you want to go down, btcpolicy.org.
Thank you, gentlemen.